So I'm using the OBS Studio screencasting video editor, but I'm also showing you how to create and trace a pattern using Adobe Illustrator. So first I'm opening the package Adobe Illustrator and creating a new file. I'm looking around to create a file that is A3 size, making sure that the orientation is of a landscape. And when I set up a new file, I like to have certain preferences organized and put in place. So I'm looking here for things like rulers. So in view or window view it was, I open up rulers, and I like to also see things like showing a grid. So those unit preferences will already have been set up either to millimeters or centimeters, etc. The only thing that's set differently is a point for text. Then I'm looking to find the original scan, the scan of the pattern pieces that I'm going to trace. And once I've located that, I place that into my file, into the new document that I've created. If once placed it needs rotating, you can use the object transform rotate, and in this case I needed to rotate it to 90 degrees, slide it into position onto the A3 size document. Once in position, I need to create a new layer, but before I can name each layer, that's much easier, especially when you've got several layers set up. So in this case I've named the layer base scan and then locked it before creating a new layer on top of that, which I will then name as pattern trace. This is where I make a mistake, not only in spelling, but also that I've dimmed this particular tracing layer when I should have actually dimmed the base scan layer, the layer that I'm actually going to trace. So I go into the options for pattern trace, and I'm able to change that from, instead of dimming that particular layer to 50%, it's really the base layer that I should be dimming to 50%, and that should make it easier for me to trace the pattern pieces. So I'm going ahead and doing that, unlocking layers and locking layers again, and changing the options to correct that initial mistake. So the base layer, options for base layer, I am dimming it, and dimming it is set, default setting is to 50%. So now when I trace on top of that base scan, I will be able to see the lines that I'm drawing much more clearly. So moving the pen tool into position, I am looking at things like, the tool kits, and you tend to use the tool palette is what I should be saying. You tend to use the pen tool, but it's much better in this instance if we're not actually having the pen tool to fill at the same time. So click on the pen tool, but make sure it's not filling. So click on the actual no fill, and then go back to the pen tool, and you can use a shortcut key and just use P every time you want to do a new pen trace. I was just checking the stroke palette there to see if 1 point weight of line, that is suitable. So you can see I'm clicking around the shape, but to get a curved line I need to click and then click to the next point, hold the mouse button down and drag it, always going back to the previous point in order to change it and enable it to behave, if you like. So I always go back to the previous point, and that makes the handle disappear and controls the shape of the line that I'm trying to trace. So I've traced around one of those very small pattern pieces for the fox head, and I'm creating a new layer, and so all my pattern pieces may well be traced onto one layer, but things like text and notches will be best placed on different layers. That's because that when I send the outline only to things like a laser cutter, I won't want all the pattern labeling on that particular file. So on this text label, I am also using the pen tool, but I want to select the text tool that says type on a path. So I've clicked on the path that I created using the pen tool, straight line, and starting to label the text that I've devised underneath to describe the name of what that pattern piece is. And I've also given it a numbering system. So Fox, GC, my initials, and number 6. So I've decided that the text is a little bit small. So I am increasing the size of the text by right-clicking on it, or you can go to the top bar and go type size and alter the point size, the letter size accordingly. In addition, I lock that layer and I want my notches on a different layer. So I recreate a layer. Make sure you're not adding a sub-layer, it's a proper layer, not a sub-layer. And you create one called notches. This time I would like no fill again, but to change the notches to something a nice bright colour like orange or something. And I've changed it to orange, and I want to make that weight of the line a little bit more obvious, and so I put it to 2 points. And then zooming in on that, I will then use the pen tool to create the small, short little lines, and then press P in between to create a new line for each separate little line. So you can't see me doing that, but I'm pressing P on the keyboard to create a new line before starting that. Otherwise I get a series of zigzags all over a series of joined lines instead of separate notch lines. So once that's done, I'm checking what my tracing looks like. So, and I have the 4 different layers. I have the base layer, which I've just hidden so I can see, and I'm now going to save it. I'm going to save on my computer. Always save it first as an Illustrator file, and that retains all of the layers. I like to quite often add dates and times, but just to keep it simple and quick, I've just called it Pattern Illustrator Trace. And then I start to save it in other types of file formats. So Save As will give you a PDF option. So I'm looking down to that. I've saved it also as an SVG by the looks of it as well. But for an actual laser cutter, the laser cutter that we have in the University of Bolton, it's a DXF file. So sometimes you'll have to go to use export as instead of save as. So I've saved a PDF, an Illustrator file and an SVG, but now I'm going to go File, Export, Export As, and sometimes a PNG or a JPEG file will give you a visual of what this looks like, and that can be useful, especially when you're want to place it into a report or a presentation. Other times you can use, you can export as the DXF and that way we can see that it's ready for the laser